The sun was a blazing torch in the vast Arizona sky, baking the red dirt and casting long, quivering shadows across the open plains. Buzzards circled overhead, waiting, watching, patient as death itself. The land was quiet too quiet, but Jedediah Cain had grown used to the silence. It didn't bother him none. Not after all he'd seen. Jed rode alone, as he had for the past 10 years. His broad-brimmed hat was pulled low, a kerchief tied around his neck to block the grit. His horse, a speckled Mustang named Clover, trudged forward with a slow, measured gait. The wind kicked up small cyclones of dust, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled like it had forgotten what company felt like. Jed was about 5 miles out of Crossbone Hollow, headed nowhere in particular. He'd delivered supplies to an old friend's widow in Cooper's Gulch, and now had no real plans, just the saddle beneath him and the road ahead. That was all he needed, until he saw the boy at first. Jed thought it was a bundle of rags lying beside a cactus. The cactus itself was half dead, its spines drooping like fingers clinging to life. But as Clover drew nearer, Jed spotted movement. A twitch, a hand. He dismounted quickly, boots hitting the ground with a thud. "Ho there," he muttered, kneeling beside the small figure. It was a boy, maybe 9, maybe 10. Dirt covered his face. His lips were cracked and pale, and his skin was drawn tight over bone. The child's eyes opened just a sliver, dry and glassy, but desperate. Jed reached for his canteen and tilted it to the boy's lips. "Easy now," he said softly. "Just a sip." The boy drank like he hadn't tasted water in a week. His thin hands clutched at the canteen, and Jed let him drink until he began to cough. Then he pulled it back. "What's your name, son?" Jed asked. The boy blinked, barely conscious, but his lips moved. "Eli." Jed nodded. "All right, Eli, I got you now." He picked the boy up gently, cradling him like something fragile. Jed wasn't used to tenderness. He hadn't held anything gentle in years. But something about the boy tugged at a part of him he thought was long gone. He mounted Clover and pulled the child close to his chest. The horse, sensing the urgency, moved quicker than before, galloping toward a small canyon Jed used for camping. It had a spring, hidden behind boulders, clean water, and some shelter from the sun. That would have to do for now. By the time they reached the canyon, Eli had passed out again. Jed built a fire quickly, boiled some beans, and softened old biscuits in broth. He laid the boy on his saddle blanket and tried not to think about how light he felt, like the desert wind could have carried him off if Jed hadn't found him. When Eli finally woke again, it was night. The stars were sharp as knife points in the sky, and the wind had settled. The boy's first word was not "thank you" or "who are you," but a question. "Are they gone?" Jed frowned. Who? Eli looked around, eyes suddenly full of fear. "The men with red bandanas. They burned our wagon. I ran so far." Jed stiffened. Red bandanas. That sounded like the Holloway gang, cattle thieves and land raiders who'd been terrorizing families along the Rio Gallos Trail. He'd heard they'd moved south. "Guess that was true. You're safe now," Jed said gently. "Ain't nobody here but me, you, and the stars." The boy nodded slowly, tears tracing lines down the dirt on his cheeks. He looked so small beside the firelight, like he didn't belong in this world of gunmen and outlaws. "You got any kin?" Jed asked. Eli shook his head. Jed leaned back and stared into the flames. He hadn't planned to look after a starving boy today, but fate had different ideas. In the Wild West, you didn't always get to choose your purpose. Sometimes it found you. And tonight, it looked like purpose wore a dirty shirt and went by the name of Eli. The campfire crackled in the hush of night, painting flickers of light across the canyon walls. Jedediah Cain sat cross-legged, watching the boy eat like a man starved by life itself. Eli had barely spoken since they arrived, but he hadn't stopped chewing. Each bite of soft beans and jerky was like a lifeline, pulling him back to the world of the living. Jed watched him closely, noting the way the boy held his tin cup with trembling fingers, as if expecting someone to snatch it away. Hunger-like. That didn't come from missing a meal. It came from something worse, something cruel. Easy now, Jed said, tossing another chunk of jerky into the pan. There's more where that came from. You eat too fast, and your belly'll fight back. Eli slowed. Barely. Then he looked up, and for the first time, there was more than exhaustion in his eyes. There was fear. They burned everything. Eli whispered. Ma screamed. Pa tried to fight, but there were too many. One of them laughed while they took our horses and poured oil on the wagon. Jed's jaw tightened. He stirred the pot with a wooden spoon and stared into the flames. He'd heard tales of the Holloway gang's raids, but hearing it from a child's cracked voice made it all too real. How'd you get away? He asked. I ran, Eli said, voice hollow, into the brush, hid under rocks. They didn't see me. He paused. I walked for 2 days, I think. Maybe more. Jed exhaled through his nose. You did good. Real good, son. The boy looked at him then, unsure. Are you gonna turn me in? Jed raised an eyebrow. Turn you in? For what? I heard one of them say they'd pay gold to anyone who finds me, especially if I'm still breathing. The Cowboys. Gut turned. That meant the boy wasn't just a witness, he was a target. He'd seen something. Maybe someone that Holloway didn't want the world knowing. I don't want gold, Jed said after a long silence. I want sleep, coffee, and to not be shot at. Keeping you alive ain't on that list. But I reckon it's on God's. Eli didn't answer. He just pulled the blanket tighter and leaned back against the rock wall. For a few moments, the only sounds were wind and crackling embers. Then the fire popped. Jed's hand flew to his revolver, but it wasn't the fire. Clover, his Mustang, whinnied from the shadows. Jed stood, gun drawn. Stay down, he whispered to Eli, and crept toward the brush where the horse stood tethered. A faint rustle, a glint of moonlight on steel. Jed dove sideways just as a rifle cracked. The bullet sliced his sleeve but missed flesh. He rolled, came up on one knee, and fired. A man in black crumpled behind the mesquite. Jed ran to him, gun still aimed. The man's chest barely moved. Blood pooled beneath his ribs. In one shaking hand, he held a silver badge, not of a lawman, but a private brand. It read, H.H. Jed cursed under his breath. Harvey Holloway's mark. Another bounty hunter. He turned back toward the camp. Eli stood frozen, his face white as ash. Was that for me? Jed holstered his gun and walked over, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Yeah, he said softly, but not anymore. Eli looked down at the badge. He would have killed me. Jed nodded. Why do they want me dead? Jed looked out into the desert, the darkness full of ghosts and memory. Because you saw something they didn't want you to, and because you're just a boy and they think you're easy to silence. Eli clenched his fists. But you didn't let them. No, Jed said. I didn't, and I won't. The morning after the ambush was cold and quiet. Too quiet. The fire had long gone out, and the embers were little more than gray whispers in the dirt. Jedediah Cain stood over the dead bounty hunter's body, boots planted firm, revolver still in hand. The man's face was half buried in the dust, mouth open, eyes wide. The silver badge with H.H. glinting in the early sun. Eli stood several feet behind, silent, but watching. Jed squatted down and searched the man's coat. A small envelope fell out, sealed in wax. Jed broke it open and read aloud, Deliver the boy alive if possible, dead. If needed, do not fail again. Jed crumpled the paper and tossed it into the dead coals. Looks like Holloway's putting out contracts now, Jed muttered. Why? Eli asked, voice still dry. Scared but curious. I ain't worth nothin'. I don't even have $1. Jed turned toward him, voice calm but serious. You're worth more than $1, Eli. You saw something, maybe someone. And Holloway's the kind of man who'd burn a whole county down to keep that quiet. Eli swallowed hard. He killed my family for water. Jed looked up, surprised. Water? Our wagon stopped at a spring out near Bitter Ridge. Pa said we'd build a home there. Said the land was ours by claim. But men came. Said we were trespassing. Pa refused to move. Jed knew the place. A wide, rare spring in the heart of dryland, a treasure in the West. If Ellie's family had claimed it, that meant they stood in Holloway's way, and folks who stood in the Baron's way didn't last long. Did you see who was with Holloway? Jed asked. Eli paused. A big man with a scar across his chin. He laughed when they lit the wagon. Jed nodded. He knew that. Man Tom Wicks, Holloway's right hand. That was enough for testimony. The boy wasn't just a victim. He was a witness, and witnesses in the West didn't usually live long. Jed rose and tossed a tarp over the bounty hunter's body. We ride at sundown, he said. To hot during the day. I know a place, Sable Rock. Ain't much left of it, but there's folks there who remember the kind of justice this land used to have. Eli looked hesitant. More people means more guns, right? More people means more chances. Jed replied, and maybe even a judge. They broke. Camp slowly. Jed kept an eye on the cliffs above, looking for movement, scanning the ridge lines. If Holloway sent one man, he'd likely send more. As they packed, Jed noticed Eli clutching the small Bible that had been tucked in the saddlebag. You read? Jed asked. Ma taught me before the trail. Jed nodded. Keep it close. Trails. Long, and the devil walks it too. They rode out that evening. Stars just starting to show. The desert turned a shade of blue that only happened between dusk and dark. Eli rode behind Jed on Clover, holding tight. Eyes scanning the world like a rabbit waiting for the next hawk. 3 hours in, they reached an abandoned homestead near an arroyo. A broken fence, a rusted well, and above the door, a bullet-pierced sign that read, Linden family. God-fearing and free. Ellie's voice was quiet. Are they gone? Long gone, Jed said. Place like this couldn't hold out forever. They rested there for a while, letting the horse drink from the trough. Jed pulled out a small map and pointed. Sable Rock's a day away. If we're lucky, Eli nodded. Then, something strange happened. He reached into Jed's saddlebag and pulled out the revolver Jed had been cleaning the night before. Jed turned, instantly tense. I just wanted to learn, Eli said, eyes wide. In case you ain't there next time. Jed studied him for a long moment, then stepped forward, gently took the gun, and said, All right, tomorrow I'll show you. But you gotta listen close. Guns don't fix the world, but sometimes they keep the bad parts from spreading. Eli nodded. The night stretched out ahead of them, long, quiet, and full of danger. And from the far side of the arroyo, a pair of eyes watched them from the shadows, silent, waiting, deadly. The trail to Sable Rock was longer than Jed remembered, and meaner too. The wind had picked up by morning, flinging grit into their faces like needles, and the sun came down hard and unmerciful. But Jedediah Cain wasn't a stranger to discomfort. What worried him more than heat or dust was the feeling he was being followed. He'd caught glimpses in the distant shadows too steady to be rocks, movement in places too still for wildlife. He hadn't told Eli. The boy had enough fear already stitched into his bones. But Jed kept his revolver closer and his eyes sharper. They rode in silence most of the day. Eli sat taller in the saddle now, a little more sure with every mile, though. His eyes still flicked at every ridge and crevice. He was learning, quickly, the kind of lessons boys in cities never had to learn. By nightfall, they camped beneath a stone arch that Jed had used as shelter years before, back when he rode for the Pony Express. He built a small fire, tucked it between rocks so the flames wouldn't be seen from the trail. Eli helped gather kindling. That was new. A day ago, the boy wouldn't leave the camp circle. After beans and hardtack, Jed unwrapped an old Colt 36 from his saddlebag and handed it to the boy. Eli blinked. Is it loaded? Not yet. First, we teach your hands how to hold it without shacking. The boy took the revolver carefully, the way someone might hold a sleeping rattler. Jed showed him the grip, the weight, the trigger pressure. He had Eli dry fire against a rock, again and again, until his aim steadied. Then he loaded a single round. Shoot that tin can yonder, Jed said. Eli raised the revolver, squinting one eye. The shot cracked through the canyon and the can flew backward. Jed smiled. Not bad, kid. Eli grinned wide. It was the first smile Jed had seen from him, but that smile vanished when the wind shifted. The horses grew restless, stamping and snorting. Clover whinnied sharply. Jed stood fast. Drawing his pistol, Eli dropped low behind a rock, just like Jed had taught him. 3 riders appeared on the ridge silhouetted by the moonlight. They didn't say a word, just sat there, watching. Jed knew what they were. Scouters, sent ahead to confirm their location. Likely more were coming. He shouted, "Ain't no gold here. Boys, just bad luck and straight aim." No answer. One of the riders raised a spyglass, scanned the camp, then turned and rode off without a word. The other two followed. Jed holstered his gun, but didn't relax. "They ain't finished with us." Ellie's voice was tight. "They know where we're going." Jed nodded grimly. "Probably, but we'll get there first. I know a shortcut." At dawn, they moved again off the main trail now, cutting through narrow rock passes and dry washes. Jed knew these back trails like scars on his hand. They were slower, harder, but safer. Mostly. By late afternoon, the silhouette of Sable Rock appeared over the horizon like the ghost of a dream. The town was a crumbling relic. Once it had been a booming mining camp with over 100 men, to saloons, and a church. Now it was barely a handful of sun-bleached buildings clinging to the edge of the desert. Still, smoke rose from a chimney, and a horse waited outside what used to be the sheriff's office. There was life here. As they approached, a rifle poked from behind a half-boarded window. "Who goes there?" came a gravelly voice. Jed raised a hand. "Easy, Malachi. It's me, Cain." The rifle lowered. "Jed, Hellfire, you still alive?" A weathered old man in a wide hat stepped out, squinting into the sun. His beard was gray, and he walked with a limp. "I'm as alive as I need to be," Jed said, dismounting. "This here's Eli. He's got a story to tell, one that could shake the bones of Harvey Holloway." Malachi's eyes narrowed. "That. So?" Jed nodded. "We need safe harbor, a judge if you can find one, and maybe a few old friends who still believe in justice." Malachi chuckled darkly. "You'll find him here. Justice ain't dead, Cain. She's just real damn tired." Devil's Bend wasn't marked on most maps, but anyone who'd ridden the desert long enough knew it by name. It was a narrow, snake-like ravine carved by time and forgotten by man. On a good day, it was a shortcut through the mountains. On a bad day, it was a death trap. Jedediah Cain and Eli left Sable Rock just after sunup. Malachi had promised to send word to a circuit judge riding up from El Paso, but Jed didn't trust luck or men on horseback to arrive before bullets did. They had to keep moving, had to stay one step ahead of Holloway's reach. The sky was overcast for the first time in weeks, a welcome break from the punishing sun. but it brought a strange tension in the air. Eli could feel it till he barely spoke as they rode, his eyes scanning every ridge, every twist in the trail. The boy had changed. The fear was still there, but it was hardened now, like steel tempered in fire. As they entered Devil's Bend, Jed slowed his horse. The canyon walls rose steep on both sides, jagged and dark. The pass was no wider than two wagons side by side, and the rocks above formed perfect hiding spots for anyone looking to kill from the high ground. Jed sniffed the air like a bloodhound. Something was wrong. "Stop," he said sharply, raising his hand. Eli pulled the reins. "What is it?" Jed dismounted. "To quiet." A stone shifted on the ledge above. Then the world exploded. A rifle cracked. Dust flew near Jed's boot. Another shot rang out closer. Clover reared, and Eli ducked behind a boulder just in time. Jed returned fire instinctively, sending 2 rounds toward the canyon wall. A scream answered one of Holloway's men, clipped in the shoulder, tumbling down with a cloud of gravel. But there were more. At least 3 shooters, maybe more, hidden in the rocks. Jed dove behind a jagged outcrop, his shoulder burning as a bullet grazed the skin. Blood soaked through his shirt. He gritted his teeth and yelled, "Eli, stay low. Don't shoot unless you see him." Eli clutched the small Colt revolver Jed had given him days ago. His hands trembled, but he crawled forward, staying close to the rock, just like Jed taught him. One of Holloway's men broke cover, thinking the cowboy was down. Eli saw him. His heart pounded. Everything slowed. He lined up the shot like Jed had shown him and fired. The man fell. Jed, bleeding and coughing, looked over and saw Eli wide-eyed. "Shocked, but alive. Good." "Shot," he grunted. The last gunman retreated, his horse clattering out of the canyon at full speed. Silence returned. Eli dropped the pistol and rushed to Jed. "You're hit." Jed waved him off. "Just a graze. Hurts like hell, but I'll live." Eli grabbed the canteen and tore a strip of his shirt. "You said I needed to learn." "I remembered." Jed winced as the boy cleaned the wound and tied the cloth tight. He looked at the boy with new eyes. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was fighting. "You did more than remember," Jed said through gritted teeth. "You saved us both." They waited an hour before moving again, making sure the last attacker wasn't lurking nearby. Jed walked slowly, leaning on Eli. His pride stung more than his flesh. They followed the path until it opened onto a ridge with a view that stretched for miles. The desert below rolled like a sea of rust and gold. In the distance, a rider galloped hard toward Sable Rock. A scout. Maybe the judge, maybe more trouble. "We keep moving," Jed said. "But you're hurt. We're both marked now, son. Holloway ain't gonna stop till one of us is dead." Might as well make it hard for him. Eli helped him into the saddle, and they rode toward a crooked line of hills known as the Grieving Stones. The land was dry and cruel, but there was something alive between them now, something even the desert couldn't kill: trust, and with it, the first seeds of vengeance. By the time Jedediah Cain and Eli rode back into Sable Rock, the desert sun was high and unrelenting. Jed's shirt was soaked with blood, though Eli had kept the wound wrapped tight. Clover moved at a slow, labored pace, sensing the weight of both men and the tension in the air. The town hadn't changed in the day they'd been gone, but the people had. Word had spread. The name Harvey Holloway was no longer whispered. It was spoken aloud. And with hatred. Outside the old sheriff's office stood Malachi, arms crossed, squinting against the light. "You look like hell, Jed." Jed dismounted. With a grunt, "Feel worse." Malachi glanced at Eli, who held the reins and helped steady Jed. "That boy yours?" Jed shook his head. "Not by blood, but by fire." Inside the dusty jailhouse turned courthouse, men and women gathered. A retired judge named Samuel Brandt, summoned by Malachi's wire, sat behind a desk scarred by years of bullets and ink. He wore no robe, but the weight in his voice made men straighten when he spoke. Eli sat in a wooden chair at the front. His legs barely touched the floor. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence. "Name," the judge said. "Eli Thatcher, age 10. And you understand why you're here?" Eli nodded. "To tell the truth." The judge leaned forward. "Then tell it, son, from the beginning." Eli's voice trembled at first. He started slow about the wagon, the spring, the first shot. Then something happened. His voice steadied. Each word painted fire and fear into the air. He named the man with the scar, Tom Wicks. He described the red bandanas, the cruel laughter, the torchlight reflecting off the water barrels before they exploded into flame. The room held its breath. Then someone stood up from the back. "I was there," the man said. He was tall, with a broken nose and a look of regret worn deeper than his boots. "Name's Clay Dobbs. Used to ride with Holloway. I saw what the boy saw. I helped light the fire." Gasps filled the room. Dobbs walked forward and dropped a rusted revolver onto the desk. "I want to testify." The judge looked him over. "Why now?" Dobbs looked at Eli. "Because no boy should carry that story alone." The judge nodded slowly, then looked to the gathered townsfolk. "Well then, I've heard enough. We issue a warrant for the arrest of Harvey Holloway and Tom Wicks. I'll write the orders myself." Malachi stepped forward. Their hold, up in Barrow Creek, 40 men strong. Jed coughed and leaned on the bench. "Then we ride with 50. The room stirred. Old men who hadn't worn a gun in years nodded. Women fetched rifles from behind bar counters. Even the town drunk, Silas Wade, offered his rusty shotgun and a half promise to stay sober. Jed turned to Eli. "You don't have to come." Eli met his eyes. "Yes, I do." That night, under lantern light, the town of Sable Rock turned from ghosts into warriors. Horses were saddled. Ammo was counted. The dust held a charge like thunder was coming. Later, in the stillness, Jed sat outside the jailhouse, bandage fresh and breath shallow. Eli sat beside him, clutching the Bible and the little Colt pistol. "You all right?" Jed asked. Eli nodded. "I didn't cry today." "No," Jed said, placing a calloused hand on the boy's shoulder. "You didn't." From the edge of town, a scout rode in fast. "Holloway's heard." He shouted. "He's rallying men. Wants to wipe Sable Rock off the map." Jed stood slowly. "Then he'll ride into more than just dust and silence." As the stars blinked alive above the plains, the old town prepared for a final reckoning. A trial had been held, but justice, in the Old West, was never finished in words alone. Tomorrow, it would be finished in gunpowder and grit. Dawn broke like a gunshot over the plains. The sky, streaked with orange and blood-red hues, cast long shadows across the 30 men riding out of Sable Rock. Some were farmers, others were saloon keepers or retired lawmen, but today they rode as one. They were led by Jedediah Cain, wounded but resolute, with young Eli Thatcher riding behind him, holding tight to his saddle. Barrow Creek was a rugged town, nestled in the bones of a dried-out canyon, a place forgotten by maps and feared by lawmen. It had once been a mining camp, then a den for thieves. Now it was a fortress, Harvey Holloway's last stand. Jed's voice was low as they reached the edge of the rise above the town. "You stay back once it starts," he told Eli. Eli tightened his grip on the old Colt pistol he now wore on his belt. "I ain't afraid." Jed gave him a look. "That's what scares me." Malachi signaled with his hand. Half the men rode left to flank, the others right. The town below was just waking up, noon fires still cold, horses still tethered. The outlaws had no idea the reckoning was upon them. Then A single rifle crack echoed. Jed spurred Clover downhill, leading the charge. The thunder of hooves drowned out the wind. A moment later, the rest followed like a storm rolling down the canyon. The first bullets flew wild from the rooftops. Jed's men returned fire, moving fast between barrels and wagon wheels. Malachi took out a sniper from the water tower with a clean shot. Chaos broke loose. The dusty main street of Barrow Creek turned into a battlefield. Eli, staying on the ridge, watched with wide eyes. He saw Holloway's men scrambling, some running, some shooting from behind crates. He saw Jed go down on one knee, firing both pistols, then rise again like a ghost refusing to fall. Then Eli saw him, Tom Wicks, the man with the scar, the one who had lit the fire that killed his family. Wicks was escaping out the back of the saloon. Eli didn't think. He kicked his horse and rode down fast. He reached the saloon just as Wicks mounted his own horse. "Hey!" Eli shouted. Wicks turned, saw the boy and laughed. "You again. Should have left you in the dust, runt." He drew. Eli drew too, but his hands were shaking. A shot rang out. Eli blinked. Wicks stared down at the hole in his chest, coughed, and fell backward from the saddle. Behind Eli stood Jed, smoke rising from his barrel, teeth gritted in pain. "You all right?" Jed rasped. Eli nodded, still trembling. Across the town, the tide had turned. Holloway's men either surrendered or lay dead in the dust. Malachi had captured to trying to flee across the dry creek. The fighting was over. And then came Holloway. He strode into the street like a man who didn't believe in bullets. Tall, black coat, silver belt buckle, and a shotgun slung low. His mustache twitched in a grin. "So, Cain," he said, "looks like you finally found his spine." Jed stepped into the center of the street, wounded arm wrapped tight, revolver in his good hand. "I found more than that," he said. "I found the boy." Holloway's eyes flicked to Eli, then to the fallen bodies. "All this for a runt?" Jed didn't answer. His revolver spoke first. The two men fired nearly at the same time. Holloway's shot grazed Jed's side, but Jed's bullet hit home. The outlaw king of Barrow Creek dropped to his knees, eyes wide with disbelief, and fell forward into the dust. Silence. It settled like snow over the wreckage of Barrow Creek. Eli walked to Jed, who stood breathing hard, barely upright. Together, they looked at the town, what it was, what it had become, and what might rise from its ashes. 2 days later, Sable Rock held a burial for the fallen. Malachi read words over simple graves. The people didn't mourn alone, they stood as one, and Eli stood with them. Jed placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's over." Eli looked up at him. "No, it's just beginning. Your story, our story." And with that, they rode east, not into the sunset but into a new dawn.